Even before the discovery of the Americas, the two continents were connected by ice, and this man managed to create a sea distance between them. Or do we, when we first discover something, not know how? He knew that they weren't actually connected. It's a malicious idea, but it's a scientific one. I mention it because the scientific part of the verse is, did the Muslims actually move ships, set sail, and discover and arrive, thus claiming to be the first to discover. So he wasn't going anywhere just to reach America. Did the Muslims add anything to the human sciences? I've taken a nap, or were they merely faithful transmitters? This is one of the attempts to diminish the value and significance of Islamic civilization in human history. You know, ultimately, we have the science of hadith and the science of isnad, chain of narration, so we are good at faithful transmission, and it was limited to transmitting the sciences of the Greeks. Previous nations didn't attribute knowledge to its originators, so thank God we were blessed. The diameter of the earth, according to al-Mamun's time, is something amazing. By God, the most important thing that Muslims added to this world is what they brought in terms of religion and ethics. Do you want to know? You attribute all historical achievements to yourselves. The Muslim, imbued with religion and morality, knows that this knowledge is a blessing from God, not merely a tool. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you, my brothers, wherever you are. Welcome. This is the 5th episode of the 100 Questions in History podcast, part of the Our History podcast. Yes, of course, I remember that we are now in the second axis. The first axis, of course, was an introduction to history, and now we are in an introduction to Islamic civilization. We stopped in the previous episode at the 4th question. Welcome, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you, Brother Murad. We did stop in the previous episode at the 4th question. We answered the first half of it, and the second half remains. But let me remind you of the question again so that people remember what it was. We asked whether Muslims added anything to their humanities, the movement of human sciences. Did they add anything, or were they merely faithful transmitters? You know what we mean. Finally, we have the science of hadith and the science of isnad, chain of narration. So we are skilled in faithful transmission, meaning we limited ourselves to transmitting the sciences of the Greeks and Romans. Therefore, may God reward us abundantly, as some researchers claim, and so on. Yes, and of course, in answering this question, we talked about the Muslims' trustworthiness in transmission, and that they did not attribute these sciences to themselves, unlike what others did. So, the second part of the question remains, what sciences did we add if this claim is incorrect? And of course, this is something like that, just like that. Professor Muhammad, my brother, you Muslims frankly want to attribute all historical achievements to yourselves, to the point that even the discovery of the Americas, which the Spanish claim to have discovered, you want to attribute to yourselves. Yes, so let's finish this with the Muslims in this matter. May God bless you, sir. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Praise be to God, and peace and blessings be upon the messenger of God, his family, his companions, and those who follow him. Yes, we stopped at this point. We were saying that one of the suspicions or accusations leveled against Islamic civilization, or one of the attempts to diminish its value and significance in human history, is that Islamic civilization didn't actually contribute anything to the advancement of human sciences. Instead, they supposedly preserved ancient sciences from Greece and other regions and transmitted them as they had received them to their modern Western Renaissance. This perception is prevalent, especially among Westerners who haven't studied Islamic civilization. For example, if you open a book on the history of Western philosophy, you'll find that the author begins with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, then briefly touches upon the Islamic period and then returns to the Italian Renaissance, moving on to the Enlightenment and its philosophers, and then the philosophers of the Renaissance and later the Enlightenment. Some of them, I recall, For example, Ronald Stromberg in his book *A History of Modern European Thought* say in the and entered a dark path for a few decades or centuries, then returned to its home and its nature in the Western world. This image is a reality now, denied by everyone who has knowledge of the history of science and civilization, including Western Orientalists who study Islamic civilization. But we were in this question. Let me also mention, as you mentioned in the question, I'll mention the first half of the answer. We clearly said that, folks, the mere faithful transmission from ancient sciences to modern sciences is in itself a tremendous achievement, because humanity has been exposed to many periods in which sciences were obscured and lost, and there was a scientific rupture where subsequent civilizations were unable to benefit from the previous one. So, the mere fact of faithful transmission is in itself a great achievement. Even if we hadn't actually done anything and hadn't added anything, the mere fact that we transmitted these sciences and the inherited historical legacy is in itself a great achievement. It's not acceptable we downplay it. And the second point I want to emphasize, which I want all viewers to always keep in mind because it's the most important thing, is that the most significant contribution Muslims made to the course of human history wasn't in the sciences, not in the applied sciences, not in what they discovered in medicine, pharmacy, engineering, and astronomy. No, the most significant contribution Muslims made to this world was in the religion and ethics they brought. Because religion and ethics are ideas, beliefs, and liberation. You could be very distinguished in medicine, pharmacy, and engineering, but worship an idol, a cow, or a tyrannical ruler. Or you could be very distinguished in chemistry, but the ruler uses you to create chemical weapons to attack civilians, or nuclear weapons. No, the Muslim imbued with religion and ethics knows that this knowledge is a blessing from God, not just a tool, and that he will be held accountable for it on the day of judgment. Therefore, he must use this knowledge in a way that pleases God Almighty. That's why I mentioned in the last episode that even a problem like the environmental problem would never have arisen in the Islamic context, because the Islamic state, Islamic jurisprudence, and Islamic culture, it could lead people to a stage of environmental pollution. This isn't just science, it's something beyond science, sometimes called the philosophy of science. Music, killing, and murder, whether in targeting objectives or producing weapons of mass destruction. The most important thing Islam brought was this creed and these ethics. This is extremely important. Even if we Muslims hadn't added anything to the historical development of science, we could still say that there are values, ethics, and a liberating creed. Human beings are not slaves to one another, and humans should be independent. Everything they do will be counted for before God. This alone is the greatest contribution Muslims made. Then we move on to this branch, which I consider the least important part. Did Muslims actually add anything to the humanities? In this case, based on my experience in historical research and teaching, when I give courses, write books, give lectures, or the like, I found that the best way to discuss this is to bring in an Orientalist to testify. Islamic civilization, with all its contributions, is important because if I were to say that Muslims did this and that and the other thing, I would still be accused of bigotry. Sometimes fair-minded Orientalists, or some of them who greatly admire Islamic civilization, say things I wouldn't dare say myself for fear of being accused of bigotry. They say it out of respect, and of course, this is part of the fact that we are a defeated and vanquished people, and that the superior Western culture is dominant. So, when I say so-and-so said, when I mention a foreign name, people Pay more attention than if I said my inspiration said, or someone from the Arab world said, or Sheikh so-and-so said, or Dr. so-and-so said, and even more than that if you bring France. It will be more likely than if you bring someone from India, Russia, or China, because those countries are more advanced. A Western perspective is dominant over us. Anyway, when I entered this mess, I kept saying, "Oh God, what should I choose? What should I say? What should I do?" I thought about it. I'm bringing up the statements of a group of Orientalists. Even among the statements of these Orientalists, I've read many books on this subject, and I still don't know what to choose from these editions. Anyway, until I came across, or rather, I chose a world-renowned encyclopedic book, asterisk the story of civilization, asterisk, by the famous American historian Will Durant. Will Durant wrote asterisk the story of civilization, asterisk, printed in Arabic in 42 volumes. Volume 13, Part 13, is dedicated to Islamic civilization. Will Durant spent 40 years writing this book. He died nearly 100 years old. Will Durant and his wife wrote it. He devoted his life to this book. He even says in its introduction that he learned different languages to read the literature of different civilizations in their respective languages. I want to tell you that Part 13 is a masterpiece in its description of Islamic civilization, even though the one describing it was an American Christian Orientalist who never converted to Islam. As a Christian, let me choose some verses and phrases he used regarding the issue of additions. Okay, yes, go ahead. God willing, next time I might bring. What if we bring exactly? If we bring Part 13, we bring volumes, we have no problem. Yes, actually. I mean, what did I say? I'll take the paragraphs instead of wasting time flipping through them. But what I mean is later, God willing, we might bring the books themselves. For example, he says, take a paragraph on what issue of the transmission of knowledge, that we have preserved this knowledge. He says that the transmission of knowledge and philosophy was a continuous process from Egypt, India, and Babylon. Oh, by the way, let me remember we Muslims who mentioned that Plato said this, and Aristotle said it, and Socrates said it, and Hippocrates and Euclid said it. Previous nations did not attribute knowledge to its originators. I mean, when the Greek nation discovered these sciences, the Greek nation was the one where knowledge emerged and was created. There were no civilizations before them. Indian, Persian, Chinese, and Pharaonic, and attributing speech to its source is considered one of the Islamic advantages. We have said until now, this is the speech of so-and-so, to the point that when Westerners took sciences from us later, many of them stole them and did not attribute them to us. It was discovered later, when manuscripts or his memoirs were discovered, that he was proficient in Arabic and translated from Islamic books, attributing it to himself, not saying, so-and-so said it. Of course, this had some famous scandals. We will come up with some examples to reassure the viewers. God willing, he says that the transfer of sciences and philosophy was a continuous transfer from Egypt, India, and Babylon, through Greece and Byzantium to the lands of Islam in the East and Spain, and from there to Northern Europe and America. In modern times, we say that this transfer is one of the most significant and important events in the history of the world, that we have preserved this transfer. Now, let's take, for example, the sciences that Muslims added. First, algebra, the algebra that was founded by al-Khwarizmi. He says that algebra is the foundation of algebra. We find its origins in the writings of the Greek Diophantus from the 3rd century onward to the Arabs who elevated this science, which reveals the secrets of solutions to complex problems. The most prominent figure in this scientific field is Muhammad ibn Musa, known as al-Khwarizmi. He states that in his book, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, he presented analytical and geometric solutions to quadratic equations. The original Arabic version of this book has been lost, but its translation continued to be studied in European universities until the 6th century. From him, the West adopted the word algebra and named the science known as algebra. Regarding chemistry, it is said that Muslims almost invented chemistry as a science, as they introduced meticulous observation practical experiments and careful recording of the results into a field where the Greeks, as far as we know, were limited to industrial experience and vague hypotheses, and in pharmacies, and they founded the first school of pharmacy. Modern medicine hardly adds anything to what they described regarding treatments for smallpox and measles. This is all in pharmacy is fine. Let's turn to medicine. Regarding Abu Bakr al-Razi, the famous physician, one of his most famous books is Al-Hawi, a 20-volume work exploring every branch of medicine. This book was translated into English and likely remained for centuries the most important medical text and the most significant reference for this science in the West. It was one of the 9 books that comprised the library of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Paris in 1394. His treatise on smallpox and measles was a masterpiece of direct observation and meticulous analysis. It was one of the first accurate scientific studies of infectious diseases and the first effort to differentiate between these two diseases. We can appreciate the profound impact and widespread fame of this treatise when we learn that it was printed in English 40 times between 1498 and 1866. Now, let's talk about optics and Ibn al-Haytham. No matter what we say about Ibn al-Haytham, we cannot overstate his impact on medical science. We believe that without Ibn al-Haytham, when people heard of Bacon's work, and here is Bacon himself saying that he hardly takes a step in that section dealing with optics without referring to or quoting Ibn al-Haytham, and the 6th part of this work relies almost entirely on the discoveries of this natural scientist from Cairo. European studies of light continued until that later era, the era of Kepler and Leonardo, to rely on the research of Ibn al-Haytham. Durant quotes al-Makari, the author of Naf al-Tayyib, on the authority of Abrs ibn Furners, saying that Abrs ibn Furners invented, in the Arab century, glasses and precise, complex clocks, and invented a flying machine. Durant also says that Muhammad al-Shahrastani analyzed, in his famous book Al-Mil war al-Nahl, the religions and philosophies of the world and summarized their histories. No Christian of that era could write a book that matched it in the richness of its material and its integrity. Regarding astronomy, he says, for example, that these astronomers would not accept anything until after experience. Practical experimentation and research proved this, and they conducted their research according to purely scientific principles. One of them, referring here to Al-Fardani, wrote a book that remained a reference in astronomy for Europe and Western Asia for 700 years. Even more famous than Al-Fardani was Al-Batarni, another astronomer who spent a year conducting astronomical observations renowned for their accuracy and wide range. These observations led to many astronomical calculations that are remarkably close to modern estimates. Among them was Abu al-Wafir, a third astronomer who worked under the patronage of the Ubaid sultans in the 5th century. He discovered the third phase of the moon's aberration 600 years before Tycho Brahe did. Speaking of polymaths, he says that Abu Rayyan al-Biruni represents the Islamic world in its best form. Al-Biruni was a philosopher, historian, traveler, geographer, linguist, mathematician, astronomer, poet, and natural scientist. He had large works and groundbreaking, innovative research in every field, and he was highly regarded by Muslims. Leibniz, the contemporary philosopher of the Renaissance, is almost like Leonardo da Vinci. Anyway, I don't know what to say, but take this example. He says, in short, that Ibn Sina was the greatest writer on Medicine in the Middle Ages, Al-Razi the greatest physician, Al-Biruni the greatest geographer, Ibn al-Haytham the greatest scientist of optics, and Jabir ibn Hayyan the greatest chemist. These are 5 names that the Christian world knows little about today, and our lack of knowledge about them testifies to our narrow-mindedness and shortcomings in understanding medieval history. He's talking about, well, enough because there's so much more, but let me point out something important. When we delve into this field, which is the contributions of Muslims to science, the most prominent thing that emerges is the addition of the experimental method. What does the experimental method mean? Greeks were a group of philosophers, so they formulated theories and tried to measure and logically prove them. The Muslims said, no. We use experiments. These practical experiments are the deciding factor in building the theory. So, the previous scholars in many sciences, the focus was on rigorously refining the science, meaning ensuring the theory remained logical. Muslim scholars did not subscribe to this belief. They argued that what was widely accepted but not proven by experimentation was not valid. They believed in experimentation, and even earlier scholars were the ones who introduced the experimental method, which is the method of observation. This method involves conducting experiments in chemistry or clinical observation in medicine. Means not being bound by beliefs or building upon a theory that might be merely a philosophy in the mind of its proponent, or logically consistent in their own mind. This is the most significant impact of Islamic civilization, which altered the course of science, or more precisely, refined and corrected its trajectory. Therefore, you find that early Europeans influenced by Muslims like Francis Bacon despised logicians like Aristotle and Plato because they believed that relying on these theoretical matters and logical frameworks harmed the scientific process. For example, 2 people in the Byzantine or Greek eras might argue about how many teeth a donkey has and debate it endlessly. This is the topic, but none of them bothers to go and grab the donkey and open its mouth to see. No, he's just arguing logically. Of course, I don't know how accurate or realistic his argument is, but what I mean is that the one who hit him wants to differentiate between the experimental method and the standard logical experimental method of stability, between the experimental method of
ولذلك طيب انا طبعا الان يعتبر لم اقل شيئا اصلا. ويلدي ورانت في اخر الفصل هو بتاعه ده بيقول انا كل اللي قلته ده لا يعتبر نقطة في تراث المسلمين.
the Muslims and the standard logical method that the Greeks relied on. So, well, I haven't said anything at all. Wilder Uren, at the end of his chapter, says that everything I've said is not even a point in the discovered heritage of the Muslims. And when we look at other things, we'll know that the heritage we know now is not even a point in the discovered heritage, and the discovered and undiscovered heritage will not be a point in what the minds of Muslims and their readers produced, including what was hidden. And Anderson, music is one of those who observe that there are a large number of books that specialize in this. So, whoever wants to go to this school of thought, there are a large number of books that specialize in the additions of this Islamic civilization. Among the most famous and prominent of these are, for example, Gustave Le Bon's book, The Civilization of the Arabs*. Of course, all I'm going to say now are books by Orientalists, so we can also believe the hadith about us being fanatical about our civilization. A book like The Civilization of the Arabs* by Gustave Le Bon, and Gustave Le Bon was an atheist and didn't believe in any religion, is like the book by Grigory Honker, a German Orientalist. She titled her book The Sun of God Shines on the West*. Of course, when nationalists translated this book in our countries, we called it asterisk the son of the Arabs asterisk because there was Arab nationalism at the time. But in German, she wrote asterisk the sun of God shines on the west asterisk and talked about the influence of these Islamic sciences on Europe and the sciences and knowledge they left behind. There's also a book by an American researcher named Michael Morgan called asterisk Lost History asterisk. The name Lost History comes from the fact that folks, we study what the Greeks did and then we jump into study what Europe did during the Renaissance. In the middle of asterisk Lost History asterisk, as I hadn't mentioned anything from it. It's an important book. National Geographic published a famous, colorful, and wonderful book called 1001 Inventions of the Islamic World. This book alone is a huge, comprehensive work attempting to describe Islamic civilization and the things they invented. There are other books, like Donald Hill's Science and Engineering in the Islamic World, published in the World of Knowledge website and available online. Almost all of them are available online. Some Orientalists specialize in reconstructing and verifying the machines invented by Muslims. I can't forget to mention here, because this book holds a personal significance for me, a Spanish Orientalist named Juan Vernet was interested in reconstructing the inventions created by Andalusian Muslim engineers. There are books on this topic. He would bring the book. He investigates and tries to build the machine described in the book. I'm saying this because this book has a story behind it, because with all my travels and moving around, every time I get hold of it, I'm filled with awe. It was printed in a wonderful edition at the Qatar National Library, I think in 2010, if memory serves. So when I held the book before settling down in a place or country where I couldn't benefit from it, I really remember the effort he put into building it. He was a engineer al-Muradi, one of the engineers of Andalusia. So does this mean we know all the inventions that we've managed to achieve them and rebuild them? Actually, no. There are still inventions that exist in books, and we don't know their secrets or their essence, and their workings have been lost. Of course, there are inventions we know about, like the clocks that Al-Jazari made or invented. Al-Jazari was an engineer from the Jazira region of the Euphrates. Muslims are generally famous for clocks. And speaking of which, I'm going to start now. So stay with me. Why are Muslims famous for clocks? They are famous for clocks for two reasons. First, clocks are among the most precise inventions. Inventing a clock isn't like inventing a water pump, for example. A clock is a precise invention, and when a Muslim is famous for inventing clocks, it's evidence of his advancement in engineering and mechanics. Second, in inventing clocks, Muslims adopted a methodology we now call the self-feedback or feedback method. Sheikh Murad, our entire lives now depend on electrical energy. We plug our phones into electrical outlets or charge them with electricity. This energy comes from oil, wind power, or similar sources. Muslims adopted a methodology for creating self-generated energy, for generating motion that is self-generating. This is a topic we study in engineering. It involves utilizing the laws of gravity, the laws of fluid motion, or the motion of certain objects. Repulsion is the force that prevents the device from functioning, so that if you repeat the action, the device doesn't need energy. You try to assemble it in such a way that, for example, the simplest form of this is if you take two parallel weights and place them on top of each other, so that when one falls, it rises, and when the other starts to lose energy, it is pulled by gravity, causing the first one to rise. This cycle continues without intervention or added energy. Muslims have a huge number of inventions in which they tried to
لإنتاج الحركة الذاتية.
utilize these properties to produce self-moving motion
حركة.
or to create self-moving devices.
فمثلا
Devices that don't need energy. For example, Donald Hill, in his book Science and Engineering in Islamic Civilization,
الجماعة دول إزاي
one of his most important chapters discusses how these people were able to utilize the laws of physics to create
فأنا بقول لك في حاجات
self-moving energy. So, I'm telling you, there are things we were able to build and see how the Muslims did them, and
كتبت ولكن ما تجربت. لم ترى الناس
how did you get it? I mean, you wrote it, but it never saw the light of day, or we lost its foundation, in my opinion. But God described it. A historian or a traveler described it.
كتبها
I mean, the things that remained written
ونفهم نظريتها
down, we knew how to reconstruct them and understand their theory, and see how this brilliant engineer made them
حاجات احنا شفنا أو
happen. But there are things we saw or
لكن إزاي كانت
heard
شغالة؟
about that existed, but how they worked, we don't know. For
الحاجات البديعة في
example, one of the amazing things in
في نفح الطيب.
this subject is what al-Makari narrated in Naf al-Tayyib. He said that in Toledo there was an engineer named al-Zakarli. Toledo, Andalusia, of course, you know Toledo. You went to Andalusia on a river called the Tagus River.
حوضين اعتبرهم
He says there were two basins, which he considered two dishes in modern terms. He says these were
أمام القصر
on the river, on the great river in front of
كتقويم زمني.
the palace. These were used as a timekeeping system. The water flowed into them according to its flow during the
يبدأ إيه
moon. That is, when the moon was a crescent, the water would rise by 1 to
القمر 2 على 15. القمر صار
15. 2 days during the moon, 2 to 15. When the moon became a full moon, the basins would fill up. When the moon was full, the water would start to decrease.
في النقص على قدر فهي عاملة زي التقويم.
The deficiency is proportional to the amount, so it's like the
ولما استولى
Islamic calendar, Subhan Allah, glory be to God. So, he says, when al-Fans took control of Toledo and wanted to understand the secret of their operation, of course, the close one says, if someone came and took them and put them back, the water returned to the amount he
بالقدر الذي تركه عليهما. يعني أنت شلتها
left them in, meaning, you removed them, wanting to know where the water was coming from, and then put them back, the water returned to its previous level. So, if he took it upon himself to fill them with water and then left them, the water returned to its previous level. So, when Alphans entered and took control of Toledo,
إحداهما
he wanted to understand their secret, so he removed one of them, he removed it from its place, and their operation was nullified. This is one of the things that we still do, and know how this
الزرقالي أحد ثلاثة
engineer, al-Zarqali, one of three
في البحوث
great engineers known in Andalusia, did. The cot of the lions, also in Granada, in the Alhambra, for example, the cot of the lions, is something that is said to have been destroyed. Yes, it was indeed destroyed because the cot of the lions was the center of the irrigation network in the
الحمراء. يعني مركز شبكة الري في الحمراء كان
Alhambra, meaning the center. The red countryside network was the Hall of the Lions, which
أسدا.
is the basin held by 12 lions. It was
أنه كان عند الساعة
described that at
الماء من فم أسد واحد.
1 o'clock, water would come out of the mouth of one lion, at 2 o'clock from the mouths of 2 lions, and at 3 o'clock from the mouths of 3 lions. So, when the
خلعوها بطل عملها.
Christians wanted to understand how it worked, they removed the lion's teeth. This is one of the things driven by discovery and curiosity. Of course, it was driven by discovery and curiosity. I'm telling you, the idea is that now we have seen inventions whose workings haven't reached us. It's amazing. By God, we didn't know how to make them. And also, one of the things I remember here that I won't forget is funny. Let me tell
ظني إن
you something I think most people don't
تعرف هيلين كيلر اللي هي
know. Of course, you know Helen Keller, the miracle who was blind and
أتيح لها معلمة صبرت عليها
mute, yet she was given a teacher who patiently
حرف
taught her. She would bring her the
وتخليها تحسس عليه بإيدها
letter and let her feel it with her hand,
و
so she could recognize the shape of the letter.
حرفه بهذا
And that's how she learned the letters. And that's how I learned the words. A famous story, Helen Keller, meaning a very famous name. Well, this situation we find that Imam Ibn Hazm mentioned something about his sheikh in Andalusia. He had a deaf, mute, and blind student and he taught him in this way until he learned. Then Ibn Hazm said, quoting him, however, I was unable to teach him how to make colors. He didn't know how to describe the colors to him. Well, this exists. Ibn Hazm is now 1,000 years old. Ibn Hazm died in the year 450. Death will be 1,000 years later. So this is the method he is relating from his sheikh more than years ago. Oh God! And yet the whole world knows Helen Keller and doesn't know Ibn Hazm's sheikh. I remember one of the Andalusian verses of poetry that described a gathering of wine. Of course, I will mention it now because of the scientific point. Otherwise, of course, wine is forbidden. The man who was indulging in his mood, who was holding a gathering of wine, why wasn't he holding a gathering of wine for his friends? There were no bars, no, it was like a spacious table, and on the edge of this table was a water channel. I mean, a table, that's my imagination. It could be wider, it could be a basin, but the important thing is that it had a water channel, and the water flowed in it so that it circled and revolved around this basin or this table. So if a man wanted to serve a glass, he would place this glass in front of him in this water channel, and the water would carry it to the bartender who would pour the wine into it. So what does the bartender do? Does he send a waiter or something? No, he just places it in front of him in the water channel, and the water channel carries it to its own just as it was. It's a wicked idea, but there's a scientific aspect to it. I'm mentioning it because the scientific part of it is that this glass, of course, was made of wood so that it would float on the water. And you do not know. So in his poetry he says, we were on the shore of the Gulf, cities between us, ships of wine traveled. So it was we were sitting like this as if we were on a river or a sea. The Gulf and wine ships traveled between us. There's a long poem about this, and this is one of the applications we used to hear about. Of course, the king's councils too. You see, in councils, I mean the man from Toledo, his council was in a lake in the water, and he had a council there, and in the middle of this council was a fountain, but when the water flowed, it covered them. They were inside the water, in a pool of water, and the water covered them. This was their council, and they would place on the outside edges of this fountain various types of mercury and colors, making the council sparkle, dazzling the eyes. Wow, so the point is that the scientific movement in Islamic civilization was extremely flourishing, too much to contain. By the way, maybe you could do something like this in your future projects, a podcast about civilization. No, we have to do it. You'll find very powerful and numerous innovations and inventions. I mean, go back to the saying, but so that the viewer doesn't get lost, let me return to the point, the answer to this question: did scientists truly contribute to the Islamic movement or to the human movement, or not? I repeat it. 1, 2, 3, no. Number 1, simply conveying information faithfully is a significant addition that we shouldn't underestimate. Number 1, what is the most important thing we have added to humanity? It's not what we invented in chemistry, physics, pharmacy, and medicine, but rather what we have given humanity in terms of ideas, ethics, and awareness that prevents one person from being enslaved by another. It makes a person see that this knowledge is a blessing from God, that they are responsible for it, and that they will be held accountable for it. Otherwise, if this Islamic ethical and religious guidance didn't exist, we would find the brilliant scientist using this knowledge to produce the worst evils. And we are now in a world where we see what the worst evils are doing to us. We are not far from Gaza. How highly advanced guided missiles kill children, and the one who made the missile and the one who directed it doesn't see that he has committed a sin. He doesn't see it because he is complacent and resigned to his position in a materialistic civilization. This is horrific. It couldn't have happened in the Islamic world. As I said, Islam added so much in terms of ethics and mercy, even towards animals, insects, and birds. This is a truly remarkable topic. We don't have the time or opportunity to discuss it now, but I urge everyone to research animal rights in Islam, birds, insects, and the environment. This is a very, very broad and wonderful topic, something unimaginable. I want to say that this is the most important addition. However, when we move to the third element, in this third element, medicine, engineering, pharmacy, astronomy, chemistry, optics, and so on made great contributions upon which Europe built its modern renaissance. I forgot the second part of the question, which is whether Muslims discovered America or not. I was going to ask you, yes, but thank God I caught myself. But before I answer this question, because it's a truly controversial and unusual story, so, according to what you mentioned, Professor Muhammad, we Muslims don't need to attribute to ourselves something we didn't invent. Yes, and we don't need to delve into it. We don't even have time to get into arguments about precedence and superiority. Orientalists talk about Ibn al-Haytham, at least proves the Muslims' precedence in inventing the experimental method. So, my dear, after all you've heard, all these sciences we invented, do you still have doubts about what you Muslims contributed besides translation and preserving the sciences of others? The story needs a bit of back and forth. That's how your dilemma on this subject will be resolved. Now, let's talk about Christopher Colpo. Yes, of course, his grave is in the Great Mosque of Seville, which is now a cathedral. Yes, yes. By the way, I mean, to continue where I left off, the book titles I mentioned now are just a very small sample. Yes, and sometimes, Sheikh Murad, there are books that specialize in specific areas. For example, excuse me, I'll continue, but for example, Andalusian civilization. Andalusia. I just want to tell you about one book on Andalusia, one book published by the Center for Unity Studies, the Arabic edition, supervised and edited by Dr. Samakardra Jayusi, is not Islamic, nor is the center itself Islamic. It comprises 2 large volumes on Arab Islamic civilization in Andalusia. All the authors of this book are Orientalists, both Spanish and non-Spanish. Dr. Mahmoud Maki summarized the political history at the beginning, but the rest of the research was written by Orientalists. This section only covers Andalusia, discussing the Andalusian economy, agriculture, crafts, poetry, and the role of women. One of the most remarkable chapters includes a section on Andalusian gardens. This topic deserves extensive discussion, which unfortunately doesn't have the time. However, Muslims had a philosophy of gardens that differed entirely from Western philosophy. Islamic gardens were inspired by their description of paradise. One of the professors of engineering, Dr. Yahya Waziri, specializing in environmental architecture in Islam, coined the term paradise theory for the construction of Islamic gardens. When you trace the history of Islamic gardens, you'll find that it was built on a description of paradise, meaning it was built on a hill. Even the Orientalists say they were amazed by the abundance of fountains in the gardens. Why, they wondered. They later understood that Muslims do not purify themselves with stagnant water, so they constantly needed to circulate it. A fountain is one way to keep the water from stagnating. Anyway, there are details we can't go into. I'll say it again, here's just one book to show you what Andalusian civilization was like. A smaller book, for example, like asterisk history of Andalusian thought asterisk by Angel Gonzalez Palincher, a Spanish Orientalist, translated into Arabic by Dr. Hussein Maumis, one of the pillars of Andalusian history. It's a concise book that tries to summarize what Andalusian civilization was like. So, I'll say it again, whoever delves into this topic will find themselves in a sea of fascinating sources. They won't be able to go back. A Yusufiya school is
يعني خرجت علماء وكانت
also mentioned. Bernarder produced scholars and was a university that wasn't just any university. Anyway, sir, let's go back to the issue of the discovery of America. Our good, pray for their prophet. Oh God, bless our master Muhammad. A phrase, discovery of America. This phrase,
عايز اقول من
firstly, is a kind of Western racism. The phrase, discovery of America, is a kind of
العنصرية الغربية. صحيح الغربيين بقالهم
Western racism. It's true.
تخلصوا من هذا الايه المصطلح. ليه
Getting rid of this term for a few years now. Why?
دي كانت موجودة
Sheikh Murad, because America existed and there were
واكلين
people living there, eating, drinking, sleeping, and developing various
الغربي الأوروبي يكتشفها.
civilizations before the Western Europeans
المفترض لو احنا
discovered it, right? So, if we were to ask who discovered America, we would say the ancient Americans, the Native Americans. They are the ones who truly discovered
يعني ينفع حد دلوقتي
America. Otherwise, in another country, would it be acceptable for someone to come now and say Israel discovered Palestine? Of course, this is the Zionist narrative that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. They really promoted this narrative. But can we say that America was discovered by Christopher Columbus? What were the people living there? They do and see them as human beings, a Western element that dominated the centuries of Western supremacy, especially the 16th century and beyond,
هو الذي اكتشف.
made them believe that what they discovered was what had already been discovered. This was something unknown that was discovered, or something hidden that was revealed, so it became the center of the universe. So, the phrase discovering America is
مكتشفة
actually incorrect because America has already been discovered. People live there, and everything is there. Now, the question is,
كلمة تعبر عن ايه؟ أو
what does discovering America actually mean? The person who said it
الذين اكتشفوا الأمريكتين لتقدمهم في علوم الخرائط ولتقدمهم في علوم الكارتوغرافيا. الكارتوغرافيا هي الخرائط البحرية. فهل كان كريستوفر كولومبوس فعلا متقدما بهذا الشكل؟ طيب كريستوفر كولومبوس هذا كان في أواخر القرن الخامس عشر الميلادي.
meant that Westerners discovered the Americas because of their advancements in cartography. Cartography is nautical charts. Was Christopher Columbus really that advanced? Christopher Columbus lived in the late 15th century AD. A European Renaissance was still in its early stages. We're still seeing what this century was like, the century in which Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo emerged. Andalusia had just fallen. Now, Christopher Columbus actually went to the Americas with funding from Ferdinand and Isabella, who defeated the Muslims and expelled them from Granada. So, what I want to say is that the scientific heritage that existed at that time was in reality Islamic heritage. The discovery of the Cape of Good Hope route was based on Islamic maps.
أيضا مبني على خرائط
The discovery of the Americas was also based on
كريستوفر كولومبوس حتى
Islamic maps. Therefore,
لو صححنا أنه أول من
even if we were to say that Christopher Columbus was the first to go, which is, of course, incorrect, he went
موجود في ذلك
relying on the scientific heritage that existed at that time. What's the similarity, Brother Murad? To clarify, can I now say I
بالمريخ. يعني أنا أخذت ينفع
discovered the planet Mars? I mean, can I
ليه؟
say I discovered the planet Mars? No, why? Because even if I were indeed the first person to land on Mars, the scientific knowledge upon which I based my voyage, the scientific knowledge that there was a planet, and the scientific knowledge that enabled me to go there was, in fact, the knowledge of the Western world at that time. So I can't come and say I discovered the planet Mars. That's number one. Where
تراثهم القديم
Muslims found in their
كثيراً من الإشارات التي تدل على أن
ancient heritage many indications that
المحيط وأنه
there was a land beyond this ocean, and that it was inhabited by people. The oldest thing I personally came across is what was mentioned
مروج الذهب للمسعودي. مروج الذهب
In al-Masudi's Meadows of Gold. In Meadows of Gold, al-Masudi mentions that a group of sailors went beyond Andalusia and returned, telling of a people in a vast and spacious land, meaning they lived there. I want to say that it's quite natural that, with the passage of time and the presence of people on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, the first to discover these people would have been the group that lived on the western borders, the group that was in Spain, in Andalusia, in West Africa. It's natural that they would have been traveling back and forth in a known and documented way, or at least that they met irregularly. The codes, whether in Andalusian books, in Eastern books, or in events that were established for a group, meaning the kingdoms of West Africa, prove beyond any doubt the existence of knowledge that there were people beyond this ocean. Even someone like al-Biruni, who was the son of Rant, kept saying that this man was encyclopedic and unique, and he was all things in one. Al-Biruni mentioned in his book that this spherical earth, meaning the ocean we see, probably contains a large island extending lengthwise, separating its east from its west. In modern terms, this would be a large continent stretching from north to south, separating the Atlantic Ocean from the Pacific Ocean. The idea that the earth is spherical is a long-established belief among Muslims. Ibn Khordadbeh mentioned it in his book Al-Lak al-Mafasir and in Al-Mazalik wal-Mamalik. When you look at Ibn Hazm, he says, the Muslims have unanimously agreed that the earth is spherical. Ibn Hazm wasn't simply stating a fact, he was stating a consensus that the earth is spherical. Al-Kindi, the first Arab philosopher of the 3rd century AH or the 3rd century AH, wrote a treatise on the spherical shape of the earth. The title of his treatise is On the Spherical Shape of the Earth. The origin of this idea, of course, lies in the beautiful Quranic verse, he wraps the night around the day and wraps the day around the night. This is a beautiful Quranic verse, understood by people of every era based on the knowledge available to them. And knowledge, so I mean what made some people, even by logical reasoning, believe in the existence of these two continents. Some of them spoke of it as a necessity for the Earth's balance. When you correctly calculate the Earth's diameter, and this, by the way, was calculated during the time of Al-Mamun with a slight difference from the current measurement. When you calculate the Earth's diameter correctly, you find land behind a mass of empty water. This doesn't create natural balance. So according to al-Biruni's calculations, this island must exist, representing a kind of balance in contrast to this large landmass. Of course, this topic was also addressed by some scientists, most famously Dr. Fuat Sezgin, the renowned Turkish scientist. He has a book of about 70 pages called The Discovery of the Americas by Muslims. What does he base it on? Of course, he mentioned many scientific details. Whoever wants to learn more can refer to the book. And again, I say that I am not a scientific expert in this field, but what did he base it on? He based it on the fact that the Arabs had the ability to measuring the true lengths of seas and oceans, and the sign of a triangle, meaning the sign of a triangle is like drawing a line. So, to move from point A to point B, it tells you to maintain a certain angle. This angle leads you to a point. Draw a line from this point to another point of the same latitude, and then continue. You can calculate using this angle through the sign of triangles. Trigonometry is something engineers know. You can calculate distances. He says the Arabs had the ability to calculate. They had a geometric method for calculating lengths accurately, and therefore their ability to draw maps was superior to others because they were the first to accurately determine lines of longitude and latitude. So neither the one who discovered the Cape of Good Hope nor the one who discovered the Americas was able to draw a map. Even if we say the West discovered it, he says a map cannot be drawn in 1, 2, or 3 years. The English and French, after 200 years, were able to draw the outer borders of the Australian continent, and after all the progress they had made. He says this: the maps we find in Arab and Islamic heritage indicate that the knowledge used to draw these maps was Arab and Islamic. Incidentally, even now as I speak, there is a map of the New World left by the Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis. Piri Reis was the Ottoman admiral before Kara ad-Din Barbarossa. People know Kara ad-Din, but they are unaware of Piri Reis, a map of the eastern coast of the Americas, drawn by Piri Reis, still exists, and we don't know how he drew it with such accuracy. Yet, in Turkey, why do we not know why he drew it with such precision? Because supposedly in Piri Reis's time, and according to his knowledge, Antarctica was connected by ice to the borders of South America. So how could the two continents be connected by ice? And how did this man manage to create a sea distance between them? How did he know that they were not actually connected? It remains a mystery. I co-authored a book with a friend in 2010 about Piri Reis, and I focused on studying his maps and trying to understand how Westerners interpreted them. These maps, of course, some people said that we are still unable to explain this drawing. It is so precise that its accuracy could only be achieved with the knowledge of the 15th century. And this one person lived in the 15th century, and people kept trying to find an explanation and went to great lengths to find one, and some people went so far as to say that this man's map, the way he drew it, is a satellite image of Cairo. The shape of the world that he drew could only have been taken with a satellite image from above Cairo. So what does that mean? They said it means that extraterrestrial beings came and drew and left their mark on the map that fell into this man's hands. This is actually something written by Enes Mansour. Of course, Enes Mansour is a writer, but it was written by a man named David Dakin, if memory serves, in a book called Chariots of the Gods. He tried to support the idea that extraterrestrial beings photographed the Earth from above and their heritage in an unknown way, and it reached us. For example, so-and-so was writing with the help of jinn. I mean, because of the quantity or the precision this heritage has led some people to interpret it as myths and strange tales. Regarding the issue of the Muslims' discovery of America, if we're talking about a true discovery, then surely those who discovered it were the first to inhabit it. But was Christopher Columbus the first to arrive? Certainly not, because we have accounts in our heritage of people who went and returned. Similarly, some of the people Christopher Columbus saw there were described as wearing clothes similar to those worn by the Muslims of Grenada. Some sources even mention a mosque on a hill opposite. So we're also talking about a long-standing Islamic presence before Columbus arrived. But this matter requires a lot of research and scrutiny, which I haven't had time for yet. But Professor Muhammad, your talk about al-Masudi and al-Biruni and their predictions, this is called prediction. Did al-Biruni make a prediction? Al-Masudi narrated about it. So al-Biruni made a prediction. My point is, did the Muslims actually move ships, set sail, explore, and arrive, thus making them the first to discover? Or were we the first to discover? We don't know who was the first to discover, but we don't know who moved the ships. Now, if the spotlight hadn't been shone on Christopher Columbus, we wouldn't have said that he was the first to discover it. Christopher Columbus, on his journey, wasn't aware that he was discovering the Americas. He imagined he was going to discover India. He relied on the idea that the Earth was round, so if he went west, he would reach the east without crossing Muslim lands. That was our idea in his mind, but his journey led him to discover a new land, which was later named America after someone who came after him. Amerigo Fuzi, if I haven't
فهو نفسه ما كانش عارف ان
mispronounced the name. He himself didn't know that he was going to America. He did, and have maps made by Muslims to help him reach America. And if he had maps, he wouldn't have known how to use them and found himself in America instead of India. Here we have points of contention and speculation because the map that Christopher Columbus had, specifically, is still being discussed. What maps did he rely on? I repeat, what maps did he rely on? Whether she gifted it to America intentionally or unintentionally, whether knowingly or unknowingly, or whether she took Magellan to the Cape of Good Hope.
لم يكن عند أحد من الناس في ذلك الوقت هذا العلم بالخرائط إلا المسلمين. كان موجود الصينيين مثلا، أو يعني نقدر نقول إن الصينيين أيضا كان عندهم معرفة بالخرائط، لكن الصيني
The knowledge was mostly in the
حركته في المحيط الهندي، ما وصلتش أبدا أو ما عندناش
Indian Ocean. It never reached, or we have no information saying that his voyage reached the Americas. Of course, it's important to mention that Muslims embarked on seafaring early in the history of this nation. Consequently, this advanced knowledge didn't come from nothing. Yes, they fought at sea and built fleets. Look, Professor Muhammad, I'm listening as if I'm watching a scene that you never tire of watching. We're talking about the civilization of Islam and the civilization of Muslims and the progress we bequeathed to humanity, specifically regarding the issue of ethics. How wonderful it is to be knowledgeable, ethical, and humble. Of course, humanity will rise and progress. This might be one of the best episodes because I only asked one question in it. This is the 5th episode, and this was the 14th question, the summary of which we will see again later. Now, since we're talking about civilization and such, I'll ask you about the golden age of Islamic civilization, but in the next episode, God willing, from Bud the 100 Questions in History series. Thank you so much, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you, sir, to watch more programs about Islamic history and to learn about its events, victories, defeats, leaders, scholars, secrets, governance, politics, wars, and battles. All you have to do is follow our history channel on YouTube. Our history stretches from the furthest point in the past to the furthest